All right, hey everybody, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm here with Trick Slattery, Chandler Klebs, and David Joseph. My name is George Ortega, and today we're going to be talking about the claim by some people that, and it's a very popular, common claim, that we don't have complete free will, but that we have a partial free will. We have a limited free will. So, Trick, get us started. When people say that, what do they mean by that? What are they saying?
Yeah, it always baffles me, George. I'm not really understanding exactly what they're saying. To tell you the truth, I think some people mean certain things, other people mean other things on it. Some people take the compatibilist position, and they think that that's the sort of free will that they can sometimes get, but I think what it tends to be what it tends to when it tends to happen is people think that because there's these circumstances that people seem appear to not be as free. For example, if they're addicted to something, or they have some brain disorder or something like that, they use that example, and then they say that this other example, when you're not in these stages, that's more free than this uh, brain disease or addiction stage. So I think it's this comparative between the two, but I think it's a mistaken comparative because both of them are through causal influences that they can't control. So even when you have like a brain tumor causing whatever action is happening, that's the causal mechanism that's causing your state of mind at that point. In the other case, you don't have a brain tumor causing that state of mind, but you have the configuration of your brain that's causing so that, and that configuration brain stems through a long line of causality that they don't have any control over. So it's the same. It's really the same. They're not really different, but yet they're perceived differently. And that's what I'm thinking this ideas come from.
Exactly. I think, in a lot of people's minds, they think that, well, all right, this brain chemistry, whether we have a tumor or whether we have an addiction or whatever it is, these are only influences, even with the unconscious. We have an unconscious that influences our decision. And they think just that these, and then with the genetics, that they just influence our decisions, or part of our decisions are like up to us and the other parts are not. And so, like, yeah, so you kind of like pretty much explained how the causality just applies to everything. How like you can't, like it's all causal, and the causal regression goes back to before we were born. Chandler, how else would you explain how this partial free will, based on the idea of influences, just doesn't make sense? It doesn't stand up to reason?
Well, for one thing, here's the problem. When the idea that we have a partial or a limited free will, it seems bizarre because it seems to me that it would be so partial, so limited by any definition that it's practically non-existent anyway. Like I don't see, sort of like how like uncaused events at the quantum level, even if true, would not make any difference at the macro scale. I mean, that's how I feel about, like, oh, we have this tiny part of free will, and it's really messed up because once again it depends on the definition of free will, and so it's like saying, well, a worm that has its gun to a worm that has a gun held to its head as it's eating a leaf, is less free than a worm that's eating a leaf but doesn't have a gun held to its head. So I don't know, but it's still doing the same thing. But either way, it's compelled to eat the leaf because it's hungry. So
Yeah. And I think Chandler has a good point on the. A lot of people take the indeterministic side, where they think that these acausal events or non-caused events give them some kind of freedom. So when they happen to happen, then there's some kind of extra free will there that doesn't occur when they're just fully influenced by things. So and then that's the other side of the coin where they're mistaken on that as well. So.
Yeah, and we have to do actually a lot of shows on that. How, like, if there is, in fact, indeterminism or random behavior, that certainly can't be, that can't give us the free will that we mean when we say that, our decisions are up to us. One way I like to describe, because I think we have to try to like come up with ways to explain this in, using analogies people can understand. When we're back in school, let's say in elementary school or junior high school, whatever, and we're given an assignment by the teacher, and like some kind of homework, right? Report or whatever. And let's say one of our parents would wants to get really involved in it, and let's say they do half of the report for us because they're into it, they want to help us. But then the teacher might say to us, well, wait a minute, is this really your work? Because it doesn't seem to be. And so basically in that kind of example, it's basically like both your work and the work of whoever contributed, so you can't really say it's yours. So in the same way, if the unconscious, if an addiction, if some kind of influence, other people, whatever it is taking part in whatever decision we make, we can't say it's a freely willed decision because that decision is in part based on whatever is influencing it.
Yeah, and this idea that a person's work is their own is stupid anyway. I mean, for example, if you're like a newspaper reporter, like you're writing a story, you're getting information about an event that happened, you're writing a story, well, you're not choosing what the story is. The story already happened. You're writing about an event that already happened. And any sort of choosing that, the whole figure of speech thing that people do is just about how the story is told. But you don't claim credit for the story. The reporter to take credit for the story happening is just absurd.
Right. And I think another part of it is that people think that this little extra free will that they're getting is part of the ability to do what they want. So they're thinking, oh, it's because I wanted to do this and I was able to do what I wanted, that's a sort of a freedom. But the fact of the matter is what they want is determined way before they even want it. So it's a catch-22 there. You can't use that.
Absolutely.
Right. And the way I look at it, I just say that when someone's doing what they want, they're doing their will, but I don't say free will. And when they're and when they're doing what somebody else is threatening them into doing, well, then we say it's against their will, or they're doing the will of the other person. But the problem is these compatibilists, they want to keep shoving the word free in there, free will instead of just will, and it just screws the whole thing up.
That's a good point. All right, so David, are you on board with this? Just the idea that if our unconscious is taking part in our decisions, or if our conditioning, our past conditioning is taking part in our decisions, then that means we really, any kind of influence that's taking part in our decisions just really negates the idea that we're freely choosing our decisions.
Yeah, I think I'm there. I mean, I often get this when I'm commenting to other people's comments on YouTube. They'll start off just trying to blame someone, basically, and then you come in and you say, well, look, there's no free will, and we're all products of our environment, so exactly where are you getting this blame from? And suddenly, instead of defending the kind of free will and the blame that comes with that, they'll kind of start mentioning this thing called limited choice. And limited choice, they say it as we can choose freely from a limited set of choices. But to me, that's like saying I have 10% free will or 20% free will. It doesn't really make sense to me.
Excellent.
So free will is either on or off. It's like saying I can't just fly 10%. I either fly or I don't fly. I can't just fly a little bit. It doesn't make sense to me.
And it all comes back to this illusion that people think that they have these options that are all viable options when only one of them are really ever viable based on the causality of the past. So.
Absolutely. And you're right. This is important because you're right. Like when, for example, somebody with addiction, people will say, well, sure, they may be addicted to alcohol or whatever it is, to, watching TV, whatever, but there's a part of them that can override that addiction. And the obvious answer to that, if that were the case, then anybody who's overweight and wanted to diet, whatever it is that, that we'd want to do, we'd freely be able to do it. I mean, just the fact that we are that we can't, that so many people can't overcome addictions, that we have these these ways of being that we can't just willfully change. I mean, that demonstrates very clearly that we don't have that kind of free will people ascribe to us.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
If I had free will, I would have the body of the Adonis rather than a Buddha.
Exactly, and that applies to all of us. If I had a free will, I'd be blissed out every moment of every day.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I think.
What?
Go ahead, Chandler. Go ahead, Chandler.
Well, what I was going to say is, people use this example of, oh, well, this person who is unable to quit smoking doesn't have free will because they can't choose to quit smoking. However, well, then they'll point to someone who does quit smoking and say, well, this person exercised their free will. And so we have to figure out how to respond to that because it's just the weirdest thing. What's the cause for why they quit smoking?
That's a good point.
I think some other people, especially certain compatibilists, not Dennett, but there's one named Frankfurt who does this thing where he thinks there's higher ordered thoughts. So for example, if I look at a piece of chocolate cake and I really, really want that chocolate cake, but then I decide I want to go against that eating that chocolate cake for some other reason, that's a higher order thought, and he thinks that somehow is representative of some more freedom, but in reality, it's not. The orders of magnitude just happen. The reasons why you go against the cake are there. so that's mistaken as well.
Yeah,
but
because here's the deal. Think about it. Why would somebody not eat the cake? And then someone will come up with reasons. Oh, well, it might not be good for their health. And so, well, here's the deal. You don't get to choose which food is good or bad for your health because there's objective things that some things are healthier for you than others, and you don't choose that.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's the thing. It's the weighing between the health and the enjoyment of eating the cake, right? So people think, oh, well, if there's something that you desire, like wanting to eat that cake, but you go against it for some other objective, that's some kind of extra freedom, but it's not.
Yeah, and we've got to do shows on how they can come up with those conclusions that really don't make sense. I mean, you're absolutely right. There's no logic behind them. I mean, basically, what they're basically kind of like they have a need. They have an emotional need to believe in free will. And that need, basically hijacks their reasoning. We've got to figure that out because that's going to be one of our main challenges to help people to overcome that. But Chandler, in terms of like answering your question, like when people say, well, yeah, all right, somebody who was like addicted was able to overcome their addiction. Why can't the other person, right? And I've had this question asked me in a lot of the meetups that I host. And what I tend to do is then I start asking a series of questions. I'll ask the person, all right, so like, let's say two people, one person overcomes the addiction, the other person doesn't. Then the first question is, what accounts for that? And then the answer might be, well, like the one who overcame it had a better upbringing, had their parents disciplined them more or something, and then the question becomes, all right, well then is it up to one whether one's parents discipline one or not? In other words, like if you engage a person in questions to determine why one person was able to choose, let's say, the moral or right decision and the other person wasn't, it may take one or two or three questions, but you always get to a point at which, it's pretty clear that whatever started that chain of causality was not in the person's control.
Yes, once you get into the questioning of it, it becomes very apparent what the problem is.
I find that very reasoning that you just mentioned there applies to a lot of people that use the whole poverty thing. Like what they'll say is they'll see somebody that's in poverty, and then they'll compare that with somebody else who was in poverty, who got out of poverty, who was able to escalate themselves out of their unwealthy state, and they become wealthy. So they're saying, well, if this person can get out of poverty, so can anyone else. But it's totally causal chains there. So they're not recognizing this. So, but it allows them to blame the people that are in poverty for because they could have or it seems to this person that they could have taken the same path as this other person who got out of poverty and made it.
Yeah,
exactly.
And people become judgmental and they say, well, if I can do it, then you can do it.
Right, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this show. In other words, like, this prejudice toward the poor, toward people that are disadvantaged in various ways. It's pervasive. It's throughout society, and like, so to the extent that people understand, no, if somebody's like really poor, they had different circumstances than a person who isn't poor, then I think that shifts, because like with that understanding, we blame the individual, and since we're mistakenly blaming the individual, we can't expect much progress. In other words, like some people might be able to like summon up more willpower by people telling them it's completely up to you, but the vast majority won't, because the influences are within society. So to the extent we explain to people that reasoning doesn't make sense, that it's really the societal influences that are causing a person to either like overcome an addiction or not, then we can just channel our resources to where they work, to kind of like finding out what in society is causing so many people to be able to do something or not do something.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word willpower, and seriously, that's a whole other podcast right there. Like, what's that supposed to mean?
Well, actually, David, what's your take on the difference between free will and willpower?
I'm still thinking about cake.
Yeah, hey, we got good news for you people. You don't need a free will to eat cake.
All right, that's good.
Yeah, no, like there's this guy Baumeister. He's actually written books on willpower, and essentially, I mean, like the difference is like that some people, let's say, getting a job done. Some people procrastinate. I'll procrastinate a lot sometimes on things, and like, but we kind of like vary in our degree of being able to like overcome that procrastination and exercise the willpower to stay focused or to get ourselves to do what we need to do. So that's what's meant by willpower, just like this ability to basically do what we set out to do. But again, I think the point that we understand is that's a different concept altogether from free will, because whether or not we're able to like summon up our willpower, how much willpower we have or don't have is in no way up to us.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the willpower, whether you have willpower or to quit smoking or go on a diet, that's all based on past causality. So if you can't, and people get confused between these two things, the whole willpower thing versus the free will thing. I know a guy on YouTube who does this all the time, who uses this word willpower interchangeably with the whole free will debate. So and it just confuses things.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, we have to keep on emphasizing it's not about will, it's about whether the will is free or not.
Yeah, and you have to think about it. Here's what people do, and this is really messed up, is that they try to portray when somebody does like something right morally. Well, they say, well, they use their willpower to do the good thing, or they use their free will to do the right thing. You see what I'm saying? How they're doing it, how they're messing it up. It's misleading, because they're equating free with good. They're equating willpower with a sense of morality. So it's totally different, and they're confusing people by doing that.
And that leads us into our second way that people claim they have a limited or partial free will. Sometimes people don't claim that that their wills are partially up to them and partially up to influences not in control. But some people claim that sometimes they can exercise free will and sometimes they can't. I mean, like some people will claim that they have free will all the time. And the easy refutation to that is like to basically remind them that the idea of free will has a moral component. In other words, like that free will, to have a free will is to be fundamentally morally responsible for what we do. And so, like, you know, for example, there was a guy in my meetup last month, very religious guy, and I asked him, well, if you have a free will, because I mean, morality is extremely important to this guy. I asked him, well, like, if you have a free will, then what is stopping you from doing good all the time? You know, and that's a very clear way to get people to understand that, like, no, we don't have, you know, in other words, like, we don't have a free will to choose that, all right now I'm going to do the right thing, but I don't have that ability all the time. You know what I'm saying? Or
Yeah. The all the time thing. Go ahead, Chandler.
Oh, yeah, and here's the problem. The weird thing is that freedom does not imply that you would be bound to do the good thing. Freedom, it doesn't imply good, and I don't know why free and good are equated like people do that.
Right. And in regards to this time thing, I know some people who say, oh, most of the time we don't have free will. But every once in a while, there's, you'll have this free will for some reason. So, and that really just totally baffles me when they say something like that. So
yeah, because like how do you explain that? Like, how do you explain, like, you know, sometimes you can have, what is preventing us from not having a free will when we don't have it? And it's clearly, you know, the answer is clearly, well, what prevents us, the same thing that prevents us at those times is the same thing that's preventing us anytime we believe we have a free will. David, how's that sound? You're getting the distinction between, like, you know, or why this idea of like a that we can sometimes, you know, choose our thoughts freely and other times not. I mean, like, does that resonate? How that's not possible?
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. That's definitely a common objection that I find with people on YouTube. They certainly do mention that as like a first stance against free will.
And how do you ordinarily respond?
I usually just kind of mention environmental conditioning and things like that. I mean, even brothers that are raised in the same household, they're still being raised slightly differently. There's still a different environment for both of them. So there's still different influences and conditioning methods. So after that, and sometimes they can even go as far as say, well, it's genetic, there's a genetic predisposition or predetermination, some people have told me, to certain behaviors. I mean, I can't believe I've had that argument, you know, well, we're in 2015 and people are still kind of trotting that out as a reason to condemn and blame, and say, well, you know, they're lazy, they're fat, and there's no real solution to the problem. It's just, you know, we'll label them and then we'll kind of, you know, just forget about them. It's an excuse just to feel better for the person who believes in free will, I think.
Yeah.
Like an ego boost almost. You know, if I can make someone else less worth than me, then that kind of gives me a bit of an ego boost. It makes me feel better sometimes.
Well, David, that's another reason we're doing this. I mean, our world is so competitive. We're so distracted often from doing what we should be doing by this competition, this comparing ourselves to others. You know, instead of cooperating on things we should be working on, we're too busy just kind of like judging ourselves, you know, compared to others. And it's the free will belief that motivates that kind of like divisive thinking, that thinking that just basically, you know, compartmentalizes into various groups and all, and just like it really wreaks havoc on you know, what humanity is capable of doing, you know, once we overcome this belief.
Yeah, I mean, if we can do a whole show on the whole how free will, the belief in free will, creates this egocentric mindset within people.
It does seem to go hand in hand in my experience. Whenever I've talked to someone about free will and they're a believer in free will, it seems to be that they're quite egotistical in many ways. It's,
and that's... Go ahead, Chandler.
Yeah, well, you know, there's this saying that I keep seeing on Facebook, and it drives me crazy. There's this statement, correlation does not equal causation. But you have to consider when you see that two things are related, they're correlated, that whenever this person has this free will belief, that it also has a tendency to produce arrogance, egocentrism, and all that inequality, you start realizing there is a causation going on. And so I think that when things are continuously related, I think that you have to think, well, one of them is causing the other.
Yeah, that term is really correlation. Doesn't necessarily lead to causation. So in other words, if you open the freezer door or refrigerator door and someone in the other end of the room gets a chill, it doesn't necessarily mean that you open that door caused that chill. That's the correlation we see, but it could be some other factor that's causing it. But there are, correlations that we do see that we can infer causality 100% from. So it just means it's not necessarily the case that something that's correlated is caused. So.
Right, and I get that, but I think what happens is when you see a continuous correlation over repeated experiments, well, then you've got some evidence that there's a causation.
Right. Striking a match on a hard surface, a rough surface, causes the match to light. You can do that 1,000 times and it'll light. It's not just a correlation. It's you understand that there's causation there. So
right, and again, Trick, as you were saying, like with a correlation is involving two events, and like the salient point here is that both events are subject to causality. They may not be causing each other, as you said, but there's obviously a cause to both of them.
Exactly.
Okay, we've got about 3 minutes left. So again, like basically this idea that we have a limited free will just doesn't make sense. And now let's apply this actually to our unconscious. Can somebody explain how our unconscious makes it impossible to claim that we have, like, a partial free will, that part of what we do is up to us, and that gives us freedom?
All of our conscious thoughts come about through unconscious processes. So, and when you have a conscious thought, it might configure the next unconscious thought, but that conscious thought was part of the process of another unconscious thought. So it all stems back to a chain of unconscious things that lead to conscious things. So you can't be free to have these conscious qualities that you want, because prior it comes from an unconscious state, basically.
Right. So explain a bit more why these decisions originate within our unconscious.
Why they originate?
What within the unconscious? Why? In other words, like they're decided by the unconscious, and then we become conscious of them.
Because that's part of the causal process. You can't have something leading to something else that's always conscious. You have an unconscious state leading to a conscious state. Otherwise, you just have conscious state leading to conscious state to conscious state, and that's not what we see. We see unconscious leading to conscious states.
Excellent. And as Lebet's experiments pointed out, I think we have even like evidence that thoughts that we attribute to our conscious mind are actually initiated like seconds, up to 10 seconds before actually we're conscious of this. All right, guys, this has been great. So I think people understand that this notion that we have a limited free will is not viable. It's not logical. Free will is like you either have it completely or you don't. It's like a light being on or being off. And I think to the extent that people understand that distinction, then that might help them better understand why we just never have free will in any degree. Okay, got about a minute left. Any thoughts of like what our next episode should focus on?
I'm thinking, but I'm not sure.
Have we done anything on the is it called the hedonic principle? I think you mentioned before. Yeah,
David, we've got to do it. In other words, like if we're hardwired to seek pleasure and avoid pain, every decision we're going to make is going to reflect that conditioning, that hardwired biological drive or whatever. All right, guys, thanks. This has been great. This is the Free Will Science and Religion podcast. We'll be back again with another episode. Thanks.